This is Paul Johnson with the Optimistic American. Now, we believe that we exist to try and help rekindle the American spirit. And so in this last season, we've put a big focus on the reforms that are going on in America to try and help make certain that independents are treated equally in the process. Now, today's show, we're actually going to talk about the whole concept of how being an independent or an unaffiliated voter actually might be better for your psychological health. Dr. Basha and I were both invited by an international publication to write an article on that very subject. You can find that on our website. But today's show I think you'll find interesting, especially if you're considering to register as an independent or an unaffiliated voter. But in any event, we always appreciate any comments or input that you might give to us as we're having our discussions. We actually read the comments, the questions, as well as any input that you may have, even the negative ones. In fact, we think that we make ourselves better by trying to understand people who oftentimes do disagree with us. We also appreciate those people who push that subscribe button. It definitely helps us get our message out, and we really share a lot of love for those people who take part in our premium program. The premium program you can get at www.optamerican.com/premium. Now, again, thanks for being here as part of the show, and here I am with Dr. Emily Basha. Dr. Basha, how are you doing today?
Great. Thanks, Paul.
All right. So in the last season, we spent a lot of time talking about all the reforms that were going on. We had Joe Lieberman come on, and he spoke about the No Labels Party and the fact that they may put up a third-party candidate. We had Governor Christy Todd Whitman. I'm not sure if I should call her Madam Secretary Christy Todd Whitman or governor, but either way, she's a dynamic, brilliant individual, along with Andrew Yang, who ran for president. Both that came on the show talked about the Forward Party and the actions that they were taking. We had people who had served in the military and that had served in the intelligence fields, as well as people who've been involved in trying to reform education and minority groups and others, who were all talking about this need for a reform that stops the two parties from having a duopoly on what's going on in the United States. Now, one of the things that you and I have focused on is that it's not only good for society for people to register as an independent, but it's also good for one's individual psychology. Now, let's just talk about it from a social standpoint for a moment. Today, 49% of the public, according to Gallup, have said that they identify with being an independent or an unaffiliated voter as opposed to being a Democrat or Republican. True to form, 44% of America's registered voters actually are registered without a party label, not as part of one of the top two parties in any event. The point is, when you start looking at them, you have to ask, well, why? Why are you doing it? And you can actually, I've seen a lot of polling on this. You'll find there's a hardcore conservative group in there that by most accounts you'd say, well, that's probably a Republican. Or you'll see people, another 30% that are hardcore liberal, and you'd say, well, they're probably a Democrat. Somewhere around 40% are truly independent. They're not hardcore in any on either side or the other. But you have to ask the question, well then, okay, if that's how you affiliate or how you see the issues, why didn't you register as a Democrat or Republican? Here's the answer. Because they don't want to be seen as part of a group. They want to be measured as an individual. And they buy into that idea that Thomas Jefferson said, which I think is a very healthy idea, and that is, I would never subscribe the entirety of my thinking to any political party or, for that matter, any man. All right. Agency means that you not only have a sense of who you are, you have the ability to rationalize, to think about issues, to be creative about finding solutions to them, but that you're also willing to listen to other people's opinion without feeling as if somehow or another it damaged your ego or damaged your sense of self-worth, because not everyone agrees with you. Being an independent is about as American as you can be. Our first president was an independent, all right? And he actually warned us against the perils of party. I think the public's just heading back to that. But what I want to talk about today is I want to talk about how that benefits us as an individual. Now, I'm going to try to short circuit the portion on extremism, because anybody who's been watching us know that we've written a book on extremism and what causes it. Certainly, we know that extremist movements, genocides, acts of terrorism, they're all tied together by ideology, and that the types of ideologies that become the most violent are those that have an oppressed and an oppressor in their dogma. In other words, they believe they're a victim and somebody else has been oppressing them. Those ideologies are far and away the most dangerous. We also know that that's not just something on the right. I think a lot of people on the left only see that as a right extremist issue. There are extremists on the right and the left. In fact, one of the things that I've noticed is if you listen to people on the right, they'll talk about white genocide as if the entire white public is under a threat by minorities. It's racially bent. It's group bent. It says, here's this other group, and they're oppressing us. Well, what is the left saying? They like talking about white patriarchy. Isn't that identifying people based upon their group? Isn't that saying that someone else can't participate or contribute because maybe they just don't have an understanding? Both of them fall in conflict with Martin Luther King's idea that we should judge people by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. And if you don't believe it, well, then just think about how they both react. The extreme right oftentimes acts with violence. The extreme left, on the other hand, they act with reputational violence. They try to destroy someone's reputation. Now, good news. Those two groups only really make up about 3% of the population. Now, it's a disproportionate amount of a primary because primary elections only have about 8% of the public participating in either primary. But nonetheless, they're a minority in American society. What I'd like to do so that we can start talking about how this affects the psychology is I'd like to jump kind of to that next level. That next level is the whole idea of how tribalism comes into play, how being a part of a party actually you're affected by how these extremists work. So if I can, let's start by talking about this whole concept of cognitive dissonance. If you can, give me an explanation of what is cognitive dissonance, how does it work, and how does it come into play on this?
Yeah, before I go to cognitive dissonance, I think I just wanted to highlight the temptation and seduction of the tribalism, especially when you do have reason to be resentful in your life. And I see oftentimes with the forensic evaluations that I do that there is this underlying psychological resentment that is driving hatred, obsessiveness, and violence. And there's these aggressive perceptions and attitudes and behaviors that then follow in suit. And it could be, I think, oversimplified, especially when the narratives are being supplied by radical political extremist views that can help give a very simple narrative to a person and emotionally helps to either fuel that reactive state or helps them feel like they're right and morally superior, or helps to deactivate their nervous system because now they feel like, oh, I have a group that I belong to, and they think like me, and they share my views, and they also hate the same people I hate, and that makes me feel more secure and safe. So there's a number of factors that it permeates and I think can further entrap a person into more of those radical extremist views on either side, both the right and the left that we're seeing.
So you're focused on the extremist side for a moment, as opposed to people who are part of a party that maybe are not an extremist. I think it's important to point out you've done evals on lots of different types of people. Many of them are in actual prison for acts of terrorism or for committing murders. And that ranges from people who were radical Islamists, people who were just simply MAGA members that got carried away, people in incel. You've seen You've seen people on the left and the right that have destroyed their life and many of the lives of the people around them based upon an ideology, based upon a belief system, a construct that was driven by kind of a groupthink, an ideological groupthink. And what you're saying is that there are things you really can't overlook the idea that the ideology gives them something. Mm-hmm. It gives them the sense of being right. It gives them the sense of empowerment. It gives them the sense of belonging to a larger group. Now, again, what I'd like to try to do is I'd like to take that, though, to the next step. There are many, many, many people who are engaged in a political party who they're not part of the politically correct authoritarians on the left. They're not a part of the alt-right on the right. They're people who are just engaged in the party, and they have a belief structure that's there. Our belief is that even those people of goodwill and good intention are influenced by those extremists because of tribalism. What we're going to try to do is to talk about how does that happen. And so the place to start, in my opinion, is this whole idea of cognitive dissonance. So let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, and cognitive dissonance is really that disconnect and discord that creates a lot of psychological tension between what one's belief system is and how that contradicts one's behaviors and what they participate in. So when things are not in line with one's value system and they're being pushed or propelled to do something that contradicts it, that's going to create a lot of psychological tension that they have to find a way to reduce. And so either they rationalize it away and then they change their belief system, or they have to adjust their behaviors.
All right, so let's talk about, this doesn't have to, you don't have to be a part of a party to do that.
No.
You could think about young girls who have a clique. We all know about cliques in high school, right? And then all of a sudden they decide that one girl's out for whatever reason, right? And the girl who's out, obviously, she goes through a sense of despair and a feeling of being ostracized. But there are some girls in the clique who actually know, hey, this isn't right. What we're doing here isn't right. There may be a few people in the group who actually enjoy causing the other girl pain. But there are some of them who will know, I don't feel that this is the right thing, but they don't want to lose their social connection to the clique. Mm-hmm. And because of that, they have an internal conflict that they have to work out, right? And oftentimes, in fact, more than often, we pick our social group over our moral values. Would you think that's a fair comment?
Yes, and what's driving that is either self-preservation or self-image or social desirability. And so that ends up being more of like a higher order value construct than well, what is moral and ethical in this decision? And are the consequences that I'm going to have to suffer by standing up for this girl, enough for me to then do this? Or is the fear of that greater than? And so I'd rather just turn a blind eye and remain having the same privileges that I have, because that is more important to me. And we're constantly challenged with this, and every single day.
I'm a CEO.
Everywhere.
I'm challenged with it with friends of mine who are CEOs, right? I used to be a Democrat. Mm-hmm. I was challenged by that as a Democrat. I'm challenged by that with my family members sometimes. They'll get into those tussles. All of us are
with our spouses.
With our spouses, right?
Parents, and children.
And because we lend ourselves more to our social acceptance, once we do that, we have to figure out what are we going to do with that moral value that we have. I'm just going to pick on cancel culture for a moment. If I watch somebody and I'm a Democrat and I watch other Democrats who are maybe in my same university, going to my same school, involved in the same social organizations that I'm in, who call a professor a racist. Well, I might wonder whether they're a racist, but the easy answer is to say, well, maybe they were. Maybe they were. But once you call like 15 professors a racist, I kind of start to know that it's probably not true. But I don't want to lose my position in the group. It's too important, right? It matters to me. And I certainly don't want to be called out. And I don't want to be called a racist because I'm supporting people that they're calling a racist. So I decided to shut up. Now, I have to begin to morally justify that. And so I want to transition from cognitive dissonance to this whole idea of moral relativism. All right, moral relativism, if you can't, give us kind of an understanding of how that works.
So this is the belief where you have to engage in some kind of justification process that you are either morally superior to others or there is some kind of rationale basis that excuses your moral, let's say immoral behaviors and pitfalls but you're still a good person in the end. And so it preserves the ego. And we do this all the time. I mean, one very simple example is, let's say your spouse, you're thinking about something your spouse needs, and you're like, well, if I was a really conscientious person, I would probably do this for them. But I do most of the things in this household, and so why should I have to go out of my way to do this extra thing for my spouse who's not even going to really appreciate it anyway? Screw them, and I'm just going to do what's in my best interest. And it could be a split-second decision, but you're engaging in a rationalization and justification process for why I'm not going to do this thing that could potentially harm my spouse, and still say I'm a good person in the end. And it happens in politics, it happens in business, it happens in the workplace, it happens with our family. It's all the time and it's everywhere. And I think we just have to bring awareness to it when it is happening so we keep ourselves in check.
So if, I used talking about creating that type of saying something bad about your wife and the effects that has on your past show. I won't do that because people got mad at me for saying, well, I can't believe you would say that about your wife. So I'll say it this way. I'll say, so you say, my husband, he's an asshole. All right. Well, what have you done? Well, you just categorized him. You just put him into a group, all right? And then when you put him into that group, what happens is you begin to have now a justification for how you're going to treat him, right? You know that saying that about him wasn't right. But now that you put him in that group, almost no matter what he comes back and does, when you end up treating him bad, you have a justification in your head for what you've done. Now, the bad news to that is that puts you in a box. The box that you're in is one that as long as you see them, as long as you objectify them, you have no real way of being able to connect to them. And over time, you start to do that to more and more people. As you do that to more and more people, you get further into a box. Well, when we think about this as it relates to this whole idea of cognitive dissonance, with cognitive dissonance is that social that social pressure overpowers the moral pressure. You begin to look for a way to justify what you're doing morally. In the beginning, again, it might be, as we talked about the professor a moment ago, you say, well, maybe that professor is a racist. But after you get so many of them and you start to know, okay, they can't all be racist. Here's the next answer. Well, let's not talk about my extremes. Let's talk about your extremes. Let's not talk about what my party's doing wrong. Let's talk about what your party's doing wrong. Oh, yeah, well, my candidate did this, but look what your candidate did. Meaning you begin to create this justification. You know something's wrong, but it's more important for you to justify what they're doing wrong so you don't lose your position in the social group, as opposed to just simply saying, I don't agree with that candidate for doing that thing. I don't need to justify this based upon how other people have acted or what other candidates have done. I have a moral line, and my moral line says that's wrong. And then it becomes, in that particular case, you're probably going to lose your position in the social order, in the social group that you belong to. That is part of why independents are growing. All right, so now, by the way, relativism, I'm probably more disturbed by that than anything else going on in American society. And it is not just happening between partisans. I'll give you a group that bothers me a lot. The group that is now so interested in maintaining their investments that they've made offshore, that they begin talking about places like China and Russia as being relative to the United States. Oh, well, we did our things that were wrong also.
Their
All
behaviors
right, how
are
are we any
excusable.
better than them? Well, they just have a different way of thinking. They don't see the problem the same way. No, we hold truths in the United States. And if you're an American citizen, you hold those truths. And one of those truths is this. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all people are created equal and they're endowed upon by their creator with certain inalienable rights. They don't believe in that. That means they don't believe in the same truths that we have. Postmodernism and relativism are very close to the same thing. There are no universal truths. They don't exist. I disagree. I think that there are values that we have to accept. And how I treat other people are one of my values. How I treat other individuals. I'm responsible for that. Solzhenitsyn told us, it's not that group is bad and we're good. There's good and evil inside of each one of us. And we have to play a role of being accountable. But you don't do that as a member of a party. If you do, you're going to lose your social position. So that takes us to the next group, the elected officials. All right, what do the elected officials do in that environment? Well, they begin to see that there's this circling of the wagons. And so what do? You would think that they would say, hey, stop that. All right, we need to be accountable for ourselves. We need to hold the line. We need to do what's right. We have a set of values and we're going to adhere to them. There aren't many elected officials that are going to do that. They're a reflection of what they see. And so instead what they do is they use fear. And fear is to say, oh, you're right. In fact, it's worse than you thought. It's much worse than you thought. And they terrify them even more about the other group. The media, they pick sides now. They play into it as well. And so they're constantly trying to terrify us. Now, if you would, I think it's important just for a moment to talk about the amygdala hijack, because that's an area where I really think it begins to exemplify why being an independent or an unaffiliated voter can be better. Would you explain what the amygdala hijack is?
Yeah, I just had a few other comments based on what you just talked about, and then I'll get to that. One is really considering the influence of social power. And I think it can be hard when we're confronted with losing social power in a given situation with doing what is more morally right. And we won't know that unless we're doing that internal work to really assess ourselves, because it's so that justification process that I was describing earlier, where you're rationalizing and using all these other ego defense mechanisms, it happens so quickly. And oftentimes we just operate on habit because we just are driven to do what feels good. And it's part of self-preservation. So why should I risk losing social power in order to defend one person? That doesn't make any sense. And so the consequences of doing that are greater. And that requires so much more engagement and understanding and insight into that process and what the consequences are that we're weighed up against. The other piece, in talking about the politicians level, the leaders they benefit by being social chameleons and turning into what they feel a group needs from them in order to maintain that power. And there is this political hypocrisy that occurs as a result of that, because they often don't do what they say. They'll just keep adjusting what they say to more extreme rhetoric as long as they maintain that social base. So again, they're driven by consequences and what they benefit from. So going into the amygdala hijack, it's a very well-known, well-documented process. Lots of groups and media and politicians use this to their advantage. And that's really using existential threat, fear, crises that where people have this heightened sense of, oh my gosh, there's this loss of control. My future is unpredictable. This is unsafe. I've got this external enemy or this outgroup that's trying to take advantage of me and exploit me. I've already lost this much. So whatever narrative there is that they can use to exploit you, it really turns off and deactivates the frontal lobe and then activates this limbic system, which is a very primitive response system, and throws us into this fight, flight, freeze response. And so at that point, we just want some simple solutions and simple answers and like, just help me, feeling very paralyzed and helpless in that situation. It's very hard to activate the frontal lobe because at that point, we're just operating on this like paranoid threat response system. Like, how do I protect myself and my family? And we can't think about the future. We can't think about consequences for our behavior. It's really hard to weigh out balanced judgment and logic and be rational and be calm. So that's all being operated by the frontal lobe and executive functions.
Yeah, so to summarize that and then to kind of take that to how this has a real-time effect. So this amygdala, this reptilian part of the brain, it overpowers the neocortex. Now, the neocortex is where all of your rational thought comes from, your ability to innovate, your ability to create, even arguably where love comes from. When it overpowers that, those functions don't work. They just don't work. Now, I cannot tell you how many friends I have on the right and left that I've seen now that this has overpowered them. And they say things that I know are damaging to them. Now, I mentor a lot of people, especially business people, as you know. I mentor people who, a lot of women, minorities, others who are thinking about going into business and trying to give them the right set of skills and courage to be able to do it. But I'm listening to CEOs today, people who are in business, who will say things to me like, oh, man, I'm watching what's going on, and I don't even know if we're going to have a government, right? Or, oh my gosh, I think that what we're doing with the Chinese may actually overpower us. Or they'll say things like, I'm so afraid by watching how they're going after one of my candidates criminally that they're going to be coming after me, right? That this is going to be something that spills over on me. Or they take the position that somehow or another, our currency is going to default. All right, our currency is in big trouble because of our debt. I've seen all the pieces on those. I've read them all. I know them all. Here's what I can tell you for the most part. The conclusions that you're drawing, none of them are true. There is no way the United States is going to be displaced as part of the world's reserve currency. Yeah, we've made some mistakes on credit. No doubt about it. We've taken on way too much credit. I'm a big supporter of the balanced budget. But other currencies have done 10 times more, especially the Chinese, right? In comparison, it's not even close. Where's the best place to have a business in the world? Where's the best place to find prosperity in the world? Where's the best place to find opportunities in the world? If you're sitting in the United States of America, you're sitting right there. There's no better place and no better time where any greater opportunity existed. But yet, if that overpowers you, it starts having an effect first on the decisions that you're making and then on how you're willing to invest and financially what you're willing to do. And then it starts to have an effect on how you treat your family and the things that you say about other people and how other people begin to see you. And you start to become part of that feedback loop as well. The reasons that it's healthier to be an independent, you can still buy into those fears, but it gives you a greater chance that you can stand back and say, oh, wait a minute. I don't have to necessarily buy into what either one of these two groups are saying. And I can listen to both sides. And I can try to understand where maybe a middle ground exists. And you can find the ability to be creative and innovative and hopeful and believe in optimism. Again, there's some reason that 49% of the public is saying that they're now identifying as being an independent. By the way, this will ebb and flow, right? I'm going to go back and I'm going to register in one of the two parties, right? Which party am I going to register in? The one that has the best primary, right? If you don't have anybody running in your primary, why would I register in that party? And as soon as that election's over, I'm going to go back to being an independent because I like being an independent, All right, I don't want to be a part of their two parties, but I may register in their party long enough to cast my vote because there are people inside their primaries who I think are better than other people in their primaries. Now, what I really would like to do is change that system, because I think that the partisan primary system's just not working for America, and it is adding to this delusion that everything is falling apart. Mm-hmm. And I know delusion wouldn't be how you would use it in psychology, but it nonetheless seems to be a mass delusion to me. Mm-hmm. So if you can for me, help me try to sum up the reasons why we think that it is actually psychologically better for people to not be a registered member of a party.
I think when we're confronted with loyalty to a social group versus what individually we believe to be morally or ethically right, it can be really tempting to not engage in educating ourselves about issues and just be persuaded by what our political party may be telling us. And there is, as I was talking about before, this value in a sense of self-preservation. There's this sense of, well, I'm now part of this group. I feel this loyalty. I know that they would be there to defend me if I needed them. But all of that is an illusion, and it is a facade. And if it breaks down at an individualistic level, what are you really basing those connections on? It's that you don't feel alone. You don't feel alienated. You feel like you're part of something greater. But if that is an illusion and a facade, what are you really left with? And that's at the foundation and core of every individual person. And so there's a lot of research that shows how to persuade people who are not actually thinking critically about issues. And they benefit from people who don't think for themselves. And so if you're thinking politically about, well, what do I want to register as? Do I want to register with a party or not, or become independent? I mean, the biggest thing that will benefit you is really thinking through critically about issues individually, rather than at a higher level of, well, what group do I want to identify as? And through that, you're going to find yourself, and find your moral compass will also guide you on that. And that's going to protect your self-agency. It's going to protect your autonomy and your individuality. The other things to safeguard against in not allowing yourself to be persuaded by what a party or political party or group is telling you to do is really thinking about gaining control of your emotions. And if you notice that, well, wow, I'm getting so anxious and I just received this information, or I saw this pop up on social media and that's terrifying me, and what do I do to counter it? Just know that you're operating on that amygdala hijack. And if things are very crisis-centric or crisis-oriented, especially if there's this existential threat, you're going to have to calm yourself down, maybe step away, create some pause, start to think rationally, maybe look at opposing views. The biggest thing you can do for yourself is looking at contradicting evidence. Well, what do I know to be true that is contradicting what I'm hearing and saying, even if it goes against this loyalty to a party? And find that balanced way. In that balanced way, you're going to find wisdom. And now you're using your frontal lobe and that higher order metacognition and higher thinking. And that's going to help give you some answers, and at least give you some guidance into what you want to think and do, and how you're going to feel as a result of it. The other thing to be considerate of is, when you feel morally superior and you've got that dopamine rush and the adrenaline, that feels really good, to feel superior to another group that you see as inferior and feel like you're gaining power over them. Be mindful when you're getting caught up in that, because there is an addictive cycle. It has an addictive feedback loop. And be aware when that is operating, and know that the counter to that is love and connection, a sense of belonging to a community that shares similar values, not necessarily because of total, complete loyalty to a group, irrespective of what they say and do, that might be political hypocrisy or other forms of hypocrisy. And you're going to get this rush of oxytocin, which also feels good. But again, really finding that balance in your life is going to help be a guiding force.
Yeah, I see this whole idea of increasing amounts of people registering in a way in which they say to the political parties, don't take me for granted, as being a huge advantage to the United States. We have to help Americans regain their sense of agency. I also think, we talked about cognitive dissonance. Part of understanding cognitive dissonance isn't just understanding, about the conflict between the social side of us and the moral side of us. It's about thinking about fairness, right? So if I take and I say, well, here's what's happening to this person in this party. And I go, well, I feel good about that because I don't like that party. And then I think about, well, okay, let's pretend like all those same factors was happening to somebody that I really did like in my party. How would I then feel about it? Would I then feel that it's being fair? If you can actually look at it and you can actually say, no, I would support the exact same standard being used for my party and for my group, then you're probably in okay shape. But if the answer is you really couldn't, you just think the other side is evil. And I'm telling you, there's a lot of that going on today on a lot of different issues. But then the answer is you have a cognitive dissonance going on. It's your desire to be a part of a group that is overcoming what you know morally to be correct or incorrect. And I just think being an independent or an unaffiliated voter gives you a much higher sense of being able to do that. Any event, it's one of the reasons I'm optimistic about America, is because I think Americans are doing this without any reform whatsoever. I'm a big supporter of reform, but a lot of it's just happening by people saying, don't take me for granted anymore. I want to be seen as an individual. Dr. Basha, thanks for being here today. We appreciate you being a part of the show, and would like to thank all of our guests. Always remember, we appreciate you subscribing. We really appreciate your comments, your questions, your queries, your dislikes, even the negative comments. We read all of them. They matter to us. And last, if you want to become a premium member, go to www.optamerican.com/premium. Thanks again for being a part of the show. Thanks for joining the Optimistic American Show. Now, help us grow by subscribing to our channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave a like and a comment. There is so much more that we have planned, and we can't wait for you to embark upon this journey with us.